We have Julia and Tschersich, Common Approaches in Plant Breeding as Real Utopias, Challenging Incumbent Paradigms as our first speaker.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for this opportunity to be able to present here. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. My name is Julia. I'm a PhD student at the University of Oldenburg in Germany, and I'm also a visiting student or visiting scholar at UCSC. I'm working in a project that looks at common approaches in plant breeding. It's a transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary project. And from the beginning, what I've been wondering is how can these radical initiatives on the ground actually contribute to a larger transformation of our society? And this question has been driving my research from the beginning, and that's what I would like to explore today. This is my structure. When we look at the former seed market since the 1920s, we've seen a consolidation in the former seed market. So we have an industrialized agriculture that is very present, that is dominated by the use of homogeneous, so-called improved varieties. And this development has been supported by intellectual property rights and biotechnological breeding methods that limits the reproducibility of seeds and varieties. And the result, you can see on the right there, is that we have now 3 companies that control 60% of the agrochemicals and of the seeds and 70% of the pesticide market. And this development has been driver of a high loss of cultivated plant genetic diversity and accompanying ecosystem services. And it also means that small farmers all over the world are losing access to the seeds, which are such a fundamental condition for their livelihoods. So this is a fundamental threat to food sovereignty. Somehow this is not working. Look at the presentation. It's not showing the animations. Well, as a response to these challenges, we see that alternative practices are arising. So, for example, we have seed-saving initiatives. We have all kinds of initiatives in seed production and plant breeding that are attempting to integrate common approaches in their work. For example, seed banks. We all refer to the example of open source seeds, the first day of this conference, and they're developing organic breeding initiatives that are developing locally adapted varieties. And as I mentioned before, the question for me is how can these initiatives actually contribute to a broader social ecological transformation of agriculture and also of society at large. And I want to refer to the concept of real utopias. I assume most of you are familiar with it. So this concept attempts to bring visions of the future into the now, into the current reality. So utopia means visions of alternatives to the dominant institutions that encompass our deepest aspiration for a world with access to the conditions for flourishing life, that are attentive at the same time to unintended consequences, that give us the possibility to experiment with those visions in the now and really test them. They don't have to be perfect, but they should be desirable. So real utopias are understood as utopian ideals that are grounded in the real potentials of humanity. And I want to argue that these small initiatives that we're seeing that are experimenting with alternative practices, that they can be such real utopias. I want to connect this approach with transformation studies that have shown that is or that have researched what the most effective places are in a system to intervene that can have broader scale impacts on the larger social ecological system. And it says that most of the work that has been done in sustainability studies is actually focused on the surface layer, on feedbacks in the system, like environmental taxes. That is not very effective in actually changing the system. What is most effective is addressing mindsets and paradigms, so the underlying values, the underlying visions of the system, and they are mediated through institutions and power relations on the mid-layer, so rules and incentives. So by changing paradigms, which is admittedly very hard to do, deep changes can spread through all of society and result in major reorganizations of the economy and society. So I want to argue that real utopias must address the incumbent paradigms that keep our current system stuck in its present thresholds and that are destructive towards our social ecological system. I think we've already, in all the presentations we've heard, the paradigms that I want to point out have already came up. I just want to summarize them really quickly. So the first one is the materialistic culture and growth paradigm. So this is an idea that rising incomes, increasing GDP, would increase individual happiness and societal welfare as a whole. We've seen in manifold studies that a growing GDP goes along with immense environmental destruction, and it also deepens the inequalities in society. It's associated with also with a lot of social problems. And it's not just the economic system, it's also, this paradigm is also present, for example, in our science, with this pressure to always publish more, to always be faster, be better. Yeah. The second paradigm that we need to overcome if we want to achieve deep changes is the control and autonomy of humans over nature. So this disconnection that we are seeing of human and natural systems. For example, the idea that we can, or this demand that we often see reflects this, that tropical fruits, for example, always have to be available in any time of the year. And this dislocation and this disconnection from also spatial ecosystems has dangerous effects on our ecosystems. Yeah, and we're losing this disconnection, so this really has to be addressed. And the third paradigm I want to argue is the expert knowledge and specialization paradigm. So expert knowledge refers to what is, or is usually considered the kind of knowledge that we see in academic and academic institutions, which also means that other forms of knowledge are not valued in the same way. And this reflects the connection between power and knowledge, that Western knowledge is often prioritized over other cultures and knowledge forms like indigenous knowledge or traditional knowledge. And it has been shown in sustainability studies that actually, in order to address the complex challenges that we are facing today, what we need are interdisciplinary approaches, cooperations between different forms of knowledge, so really between praxis and science, and to really put them on the same level. I want to argue that the SEEDCOMS initiatives that we are seeing are addressing those three paradigms. These initiatives are very heterogeneous, of course. In our research project, we've come up with 5 main features of SEEDCOMS that are, I would say, are present in most of them. First of all, they acknowledge a collective responsibility to preserve our plant genetic diversity. in many initiatives, for example, Mazipak, which is a rice breeder network in the Philippines, they very strongly refer to the sacredness of seeds, the sacredness of rice. They very strongly reject this idea that seeds or varieties can be commercialized. That goes along with the rejection of private property rights on seeds and varieties. So most of these initiatives find ways to protect varieties from private enclosure. They don't breed for profit, but follow, especially the organic breeding initiatives, follow the principles of health, ecology, fairness, and care. They breed and manage varieties in collective polycentric manners, again bringing together different forms of knowledge. So they value the knowledge of farmers on the same level as the more formal knowledge of breeders. But they reject the breeding in the laboratory, which again reflects a rejection of this paradigm of control and autonomy of humans over nature. They employ methods of breeding that value reproducibility of varieties. So I think this connects very well to the first talk we've heard today. So they reject the use of biotechnology. They reject terminator seeds, for example, but instead see plants as embedded in the ecosystem, and also the connection between the breeder and the plant. This is almost a spiritual approach to breeding. So really being in the field and kind of building a connection to the plant, trying to understand how the plants behave, and yeah, going into a dialogue basically with the plants. Sorry, this animation wasn't working so well. The last feature is the sharing of knowledge. So the knowledge that is generated in this process is shared among the initiative, and also with other actors. Again, acknowledging that this should not be expert knowledge, but it should be knowledge that is accessible to everybody. So in this way, these initiatives are really rejecting this paradigm of materialistic culture and growth by embracing their responsibility to maintain plant genetic diversity and breeding for those deeper principles, which is also connected to a new connection of humans to nature, and embracing the diversity of knowledges that is present, especially in such in breeding processes, acknowledging the tradition of farmers' contribution to breeding. So what I've argued for in this talk is that if we want to achieve a deep transformation of our socio-ecological system, we need deep changes in paradigms. I'm not saying that this is the only thing that matters. Of course, this has to be reflected in institutions, and we have to challenge the existing power relations. But if we want to go this way, I think in everything we do, even in our scientific processes, we have to be aware of those paradigms and trying to challenge them. And I think that even initiatives even on the ground, even if they're small, they can contribute to this by creating real utopias, showing and testing that there are viable alternatives to the status quo that actually function in practice. And I think seed commons are such an example. Okay. Thank you very much for your...
Okay, thank you very much.